Yeah, this is fancy. Use my gardening jeans. Are you good?
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, most of you here, for everybody that's watching the stream, my name's Scott Rolliter. I'm the instructor up here at Billiard Factory. This is our first attempt at streaming, so for anybody watching, please leave some comments if there's anything you'd like to see different or see any issues with the stream. Again, probably a work in progress. I actually started a 8-part series last month on basically like how to play on how to play pool. So I kind of had this idea of, like, I've seen these masterclass things out there where they kind of go through and go like from A to Z everything you need to know to play pool. So because we got the equipment in this month, I'm actually going to go back and re-record that first lesson. So if anybody missed that first lesson, you guys, probably in a couple of weeks, I'll put something on my Facebook page. You guys will be able to go out there and watch everything from that first lesson as well. So the first one was all on fundamentals. The second one is going to be something equally as important, maybe more important, which is putting the object ball in the pocket. That's kind of the whole goal of the game. It's nice to do it properly and perfectly, but really the ultimate goal is to put the ball in the hole. So that's what we're going to talk about today, like everything regarding shot making. Again, for all you guys here, if you guys have any questions, as usual, you guys can just kind of jump in and ask away. So I want to cover a little bit about we covered last time, but it's so important to shot making. I want to kind of go over some elements of the pre-shot routine as it relates to shot making. A large portion of my lessons that I teach, people are missing balls not because they can't aim, but it's because of alignment or issues with their pre-shot routine. So if I look at a given shot, doesn't have to be anything complicated. So even just a straight in shot like this. Everybody can usually, even beginners, can usually see exactly where to aim on this ball. They can see how to make the ball. What's difficult for them is getting down on the shot on the line that they know from when they're standing back here. They can see the line, but when they get down, they end up with the wrong eye over the stick. They end up with their head crooked. They end up with their body kind of twisted, or they have poor cueing technique where things aren't coming back and forth straight. So really, for our pre-shot routine, our whole goal is to stand back here, a little bit away from the shot, visualize the shot, think about the English you need, the speed you need, all of that, and be able to wrap your body around your cue in such a way that when you get down, you're on the shot line that you envisioned when you're standing up. We don't, and again, when you're a beginner, some of this is a little bit different, but you don't want to be re-aiming the shot when you're down on the shot. So if I get down here like this, and I'm kind of, doing one of these, trying to figure out how to aim the shot. Again, when you're a beginning player, you have to do some of that to be able to, just because you're new at it, you have to kind of see the ball, you have to kind of feel your way into it. But when you've been playing for even a short amount of time, you should try to minimize that you're on. One of the big things I see people doing, if you think about this, if I'm standing here like this, I'll try to do it maybe this way if it looks a little better. Have to remember that. So if I'm standing right here looking at this shot with my head, middle of my, my nose, and I'm looking like this, half my body's on this side, half my body's on this side. When we shoot pool, generally our back leg is on the line, which means the rest of your body has to kind of be off to the side a little bit. So if I'm standing here, I have to figure out a repeatable approach for me to get sort of like this. If you really watch there's tons of YouTube matches out there. If you watch a lot of the pros, especially when the camera angles are pretty good, you can clearly see that they are leaning over on their back leg. They are not standing square to the shot like this. They're either standing at a 45-degree angle so that as it comes back, it's hitting their head and hitting kind of their hip and their back leg, or they're leaning. So in other words, I have my back leg on the line, But instead of me standing like this, which means I'd be looking down in this area, I basically just kind of put all my weight on my right leg, so my head's over here. So it's really, really crucial. I don't see any top players that don't do this. You have to have your head behind the shot line. So it doesn't matter if it's straight in. If I'm hitting this kind of a cut, and I visualize that my shot line is right here, I have to end up, when I'm back here, I have to be looking down that shot line with my head behind the shot line. A lot of people I see, because they put their right foot or their right hip on the shot line, they're standing like this, and their head is actually 6 inches to a foot to the left, or if you're left-handed, to the right, inside the shot line. I very rarely see anybody with their head on the other side of the shot line. Usually they're to the inside. So what happens is, if I'm standing like this and my shot line's over here, I now have to step in and kind of come into the shot diagonally to get my head on that line. And what happens is, if I come in diagonally, I may hit my mark, I may be off a little bit. And a lot of people I see that have a real big problem with this, they tend to miss the ball in the same direction and the same amount every single time when they miss, because they're either overdoing it or they're underdoing it. So it's really important to, for me personally, I like to have my back foot on the line. I like to have my hip kind of right up the thigh, like on the line, and I like to have my hand kind of right there too. That way, when I go to get down on the shot, my hand is right there, and all I have to do is really rotate my cue into position. I see a lot of people, they stand like this, or they stand like this somehow. Well, if my hand is way over here, for me to get down now, I've got to move it all that distance and land perfectly behind that shot line. If I start with it right here, it's so much easier for me just to walk in and get down on that line. Another thing I see people do is, in their pre-shot routine, they stand back here, even if everything looks good. When they make that first step in, they make a big step with their front foot, and it pulls their body to the left. And then they again have to come back and lean back over to the right. So you guys can come on just and find a spot. So again, it's really important when you step not to let your weight completely take your body out of position. So again, I've got a lot of my weight on my right foot right now. I'm standing just a little, not square, just a little bit kind of closed. So when I go to step in, my head's staying right here, foot, but my head is staying right on that line. I don't want to be looking like that and then having to get back on the line again. It's hard to tell this when you're playing by yourself. I would either have a friend like videotape you, or you could prop your phone up on on a counter or something, or if you have a table at home, try to find a spot where you can prop it up. And it's pretty easy to see. You should again watch your head coming down that line. Another big concept with the pre-shot routine, and I think Lee Brett has this concept in his book. He talks about being outside the box. So he draws like I think it's a 2-foot square around, or sorry, rectangle around the table, and he mentions that when you're outside the box is when you do all of your aiming, you're visualizing, figuring out what you're going to do on the shot. And once you step inside that box, your only goal should be to just stroke in a straight line. You're no longer thinking, you're no longer aiming, you're no longer using your conscious. It's more of a subconscious activity. That's really hard to do, even for me. It's easy when you're down on the shot, fine-tuning or wondering, oh, am I going to make this, or worrying about things. But really the top players, what they're really good at is they're back here, they're figuring everything out, and when they get down here, it's a very pre-established pattern of eye movement and a pre-established pattern of warm-up strokes, and then a nice pause, and then they just let that arm fire through like they've done a million times before. And that's a lot easier said than done, but that is the ultimate goal, is to have a good, clean stroke process and not be thinking about your English or your speed or anything when you're down on the shot. If I were to hit, like, make it a little more difficult, if I was to hit going from the 10 to the 7, when I'm standing right here, I'm looking down my shot line, I'm already kind of thinking, and again, this is as you've played for a while, but when you're a beginner, you do have to spend a little bit of time thinking about this. So I'm thinking, do I need draw? Do I need some right English? What speed do I need? Am I going to come straight back up the rail? Am I going to come off of this rail? But once I'm thinking about what I want to do, when I get down here, right here, I'm no longer thinking. I'm just going through my routine and just hitting the ball. So if I got down there and I start moving my tip around and second guessing myself, I'm going to miss a lot of balls that way. Now there's a whole lot more things with the pre-shot routine as far as eye patterns and warm-up strokes and having that movement getting down, but those are the things I think specifically are really important to aiming, and I just wanted to cover them because again I see a lot of people doing that. And really the last part of that is making sure that once you get down to the cue ball, before you start any practice strokes or do anything, make sure your tip position is where you want it to be. I see a lot of people, and there's some pros that play like this, and that's okay. You don't want to start moving your cue stick around a whole bunch before you're laying at the cue ball. So in other words, when I get down, I want to make sure that I'm kind of where I want to be before I start my practice strokes. There are some pros that kind of get down and they're already stroking, but they're looking very intently at the cue ball where they want to hit. I think most people, though, there's at least a brief connection there with that tip position before they start taking their practice strokes. I just had a student the other night that he landed probably half an inch to the left of where he was trying to hit. His setup was perfect. His arm was pretty good. But when he landed, his cue was like way over here for some reason. And he kept continually kind of getting closer and closer to center ball, but he never quite got there. But when he pulled his cue back, he rerouted his hand and stroked right through the center of the ball. And I never really haven't had too many students that are that accurate. He'd hit these stop shots like this and the ball would just have no spin on it and would stop perfectly. But I could see from in front of the cue ball he was a half an inch off. And so of course when we corrected that, now he started hitting like a half inch to the right because he had built in that compensation over the years to reroute that cue stick. So in the long run though, he's going to be better off trying to aim where he's hitting, hitting where he's aiming, because that rerouting motion is inherently sort of inaccurate. If he reroutes it under pressure, he might grip a little bit and not quite get there, might swipe across the ball a little bit, those kinds of things. So just like with the golf swing, if you fix one thing in your swing, oftentimes there's going to reveal another flaw that's been there that's been covering up the first one, and it might be kind of a little series of things. But it's definitely hard work to get all of that straightened out, but it's really important. The game has to be very precise. You have to hit within a millimeter often of where you're trying to aim, and it's really important to have those things firmed up. Any questions on the pre-shot routine stuff or getting down on the shot? Okay. So let's talk about aiming for a little bit. Pretty important. There are a bunch of different ways to aim. There are the traditional methods that people teach in some of the books. There's some non-traditional methods that are a little more obscure but are starting to gain a little foothold. And I'm certified to teach a few of those methods, but me personally, I don't even push those necessarily on people. If I taught you a somewhat complex kind of pivot aiming system and showed you everything how to do it, and you can't move your cue in a straight line, it's not really going to benefit you very much. There's also a lot of conscious work that has to be done in the beginning when you work with some of these other aiming systems. But they can produce a lot of benefits, and they are good. What I always tell my students, though, is that I don't really care how you visualize the shot. I don't care if you look at a ghost ball, if you look at some imaginary point, if you project the point out to the rail, if you think about the ball in fractions. None of that matters as long as you can get on the shot line properly. So I'm just going to briefly, because I had a whole hour-and-a-half class on aiming a couple of months ago, but I do want to cover it a little bit here and offer you guys a chance to ask some questions. So I think the most basic one and the one taught in most of the books is ghost ball. So quite simply, if you have a shot, you want to look at an imaginary ball that's sort of, if you project a line from the pocket through the ball, through the back of the ball, and you look at where an imaginary ball would be. So in this case, the 3 ball would basically be the ghost ball. So the theory is, no matter where the cue ball is, if I can roll the cue ball over the 3 ball and have it take its place, it's going to hit the 7 in the proper spot and make the ball. So it shouldn't matter whether the cue ball's here. I would roll right over the 3, or if it's over here, again, I would roll right over the 3. So that's kind of a good way for beginners to visualize aiming, and that's actually the way a number of top players have learned to aim, and they still kind of visualize things that way. Sometimes people take it an extra step, and instead of visualizing a whole imaginary ball, they picture a spot that's about an inch behind the ball, which would be the center of this ghost ball, and then they try to roll their cue ball over the center of that point. And sometimes that gives people like a little kind of spot on the table where they can aim at, and it's a little less vague than just a whole ghost ball. I know my wife showed some interest in playing just a couple months ago after not playing for 20-some years. She was having a hard time visualizing the shots, but her stroke was actually not that bad. And what I started doing with her was gradually setting up some more difficult shots and setting that ghost ball up, and I'd have her aim right at the 3 ball, and then I'd pick it up and just have her shoot. And she made a lot of shots that way. So it kind of showed me that her stroke was actually pretty good. She just had, as beginners typically do, they just had no idea how thick to make the contact to get the ball to go in. Now there are some challenges with the ghost ball technique, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. There's a collision-induced throw that happens, so the line's not going to be perfect. And again, it just can be hard to see for some people. So, but from a theoretical standpoint on paper, it's probably the most accurate way to explain to somebody how to aim a shot. Any questions on ghost ball technique? Okay. The next one that I see people using is some sort of contact point aiming. And so on a shot like this, again, might look at what it takes to point that ball into the pocket. So if I look at where the 7 is on the back of the ball, that's the actual contact point on the back of the object ball that has to be hit with some part of the cue ball for the ball to go in the hole. So the challenge with this is when I'm aiming from, let's say here, I can't aim the center of the cue ball at that contact point. It's going to hit the ball too thick. You guys can, no, hey, you can just grab a chair anywhere. You can come on over. So I can't aim directly at that point. If I aim directly at this point, the cue ball is going to hit the 7 ball before it hits that contact point, and it's going to usually result in a thick contact. So I have to figure out what part of the cue ball is going to hit that part of the object ball for it to go in. And generally, if I'm hitting, if we kind of break this into sections, if this is straight on to the rail, and let's say I'm over like, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch to where the contact point is, then when I'm looking at my cue ball, I also have to be kind of a 1/4 of an inch that way from the center. And so I would, it's definitely not going to show up well on the camera. I don't know if you guys can see, but if I'm aiming right here, that means like this part of the cue ball would be hitting that part of the ball. So for every offset there is on the object ball, there's going to be an equal offset on the cue ball. Joe Tucker has a really good system that talks about this. I think he calls it aiming by the numbers. He breaks the cue ball into 9 numbers and has all these reference shots you can shoot to learn the different angles and what's a 1 or a 2 or a 5 or a whatever. And it does work. It works really well. It just, some people are going to visualize that better than others. So if you're one of the ones that visualizes the shot that way, then that's great. I know, for instance, that if a ball's on the spot, so if it's right on the spot, he numbers a 1 would be coming across, and a 9 would be kind of the other direction. So 4.5 would be right in between. So 4.5 would be kind of right, like a 45-degree angle, right? Here's one side, here's the other, that's right in between. So regardless of where my cue ball is, that means if I picture a 45-degree angle from the center of the ball out here, that spot on the cue ball has to hit that spot on the 7 ball. And so I can make that ball from here, from here, from here, from here. It doesn't matter, because even though this feels like it's straight in, I'm shooting right down that 45-degree line. So again, if you practice the drills and you work with the contact point aiming, it can be a really good kind of a visualized trick to be able to pocket balls. And what some people do is they use two methods, right? They might use ghost ball, but then they might kind of look at the contact point and use that as a double check. Some people might even use one method on some shots and one method on another. Especially when you have rail shots, it can be useful to think about things like that, because when the ball's pretty close to the rail, your contact point is basically straight behind the back of the ball. So if you can visualize this edge of the ball hitting that edge of the ball, it can really help you aim like some of these thinner rail shots. Any questions on the contact point aiming? I know most of you were here for the class that we did on aiming. So there's two other methods that I think are pretty prevalent. The next one would be fractional aiming, and that's just breaking the ball down into fractions. So if I hit this ball, if I'm aiming at that pocket down there, if I hit this ball full in the face, that would be a full overlap. That would be basically a straight in shot. So if I move the ball over here to where the left edge of the cue ball is at, overlapping 3/4 of this 7 ball. So that would be considered a 3/4 ball hit. And that's about 15 degrees roughly. It's like 14.5. If I go halfway, where the inside edge of the cue ball is hitting the middle of the ball, and also the middle of the cue ball is on the outside edge of that ball, that's a 30-degree angle. And that's the easiest one to visualize, and actually gives you the most leeway, because if you tend to hit about 29 or 31 degrees, the ball tends to go in about the same spot, and the cue ball tends to travel about the same way. So it's kind of the most forgiving hit. And then if you go a little thinner, that would be like a quarter ball hit, like there. That's about 49 degrees. So, and then you can go, people sometimes break their fractions into eighths even, and really try to fine tune it. But in general, you can learn the angles, the reference angles, and practice them, and then you can start to infer in between the angles when you need to. So I have a few students that use fractional aiming, and they'll have a shot like this, and they'll just look at it and say, oh, that's a half ball hit. And they just see it because they've hit so many balls, they kind of know that it feels like a half ball hit. So if it is a half ball hit, that means I can aim the center of my cue ball right at the edge of that ball. And I think this one is actually pretty close. So it makes the aiming, it takes some of the uncertainty out of the aiming if you really work with the fractional system and you can really see those angles. And really with just a little bit of practice, you can see it. I know, like, if the ball is just outside the second diamond here, and if my cue ball is on a line from this diamond in, that's about a 3/4 ball hit. So again, if I can visualize the left edge of this cue ball being about a quarter of the way into the ball, and picture that 3/4 ball overlap, as I see these shots come up over and over again, I'm going to feel what that hit is. And if it's a little thinner or a little thicker, I'll kind of, again, be able to adjust just a little bit. And I know one of my students is really big into this, and he's pretty accurate shot maker with this system. The last method of aiming that I'm just going to touch on a little bit is some of the pivot-based aiming systems. So a lot of the pool style, they invented probably back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, something like that. They recognized from hours and hours of playing that there were these relationships between the balls, and that if they did certain things, they felt like they could get onto the shot line by aiming different points than what you would normally traditionally aim at. So a lot of you may have heard of like center to edge. So there was a big system back in the day where you would aim the center of the cue ball at the edge of the object ball, and you're thinking to yourself, well, that's only going to make the ball if it's in one particular orientation. But they would introduce a pivot movement into the shot, and the pivot would be based on the relationship between the two balls. So for a thicker cut, they would pivot less, and for a thinner cut, they would pivot a little more. And they developed kind of a little system to be able to pocket a lot of balls from a lot of different positions using that one alignment. There's also 9090, Ron Botello, who passed away a couple years ago, I think. He invented a system where you line up the inside edge of the ball with the inside edge of the ball, and again, make a kind of a hip pivot to get into position. One of my buddies in Germany, Eckes, he came up with something called the C system, where you actually use the shadows under the ball and sometimes under this ball to aim with, and it kind of gives you a consistent aiming point on all of your shots. So all those things are useful. I've tested them all out. They all work. They definitely require a lot of time at the table and a lot of study to be able to make it work from all different positions. I personally believe no one's really mathematically proven any of these things yet. I personally believe that there is some geometry to it, but I also think that there's aspects of our visual, like our mind, that helps us kind of zone in on the aiming spot a little bit easier maybe than a regular technique. I know for me, when I use one of these techniques when I play. So for me, I aim the majority of my shots in two different ways. So I feel like I have a very strong connection between those two shots over and over and over and over again. And the pivot movement just sort of takes care of itself because I've put so much time into it. So I feel like that is a benefit, at least for me, because I'm kind of a very analytical person, so I just don't like not knowing that I'm lined up properly. And some of these pivot systems, especially with some of the work that like Stan Shuffett's done recently, and he's got a big book coming out soon that's going to explain everything in detail. It can make you feel like you're very locked in on the shot. And for someone like me, if I feel very locked in and my stroke is reasonably good, then I feel like I can make a lot of balls. But again, I've taught a lot of lessons on this. I've done it even over Skype to people that live other parts of the country or the world. I've had people fly in here from all over the place to do lessons. I'm happy to do that. It has to be the right kind of student for that. Somebody who's willing to put the time at a decent level. Otherwise, I feel like it kind of gets lost a little bit. But I've actually had some success with some people that are kind of traditional APA 3s or 4s that have reasonable stroke structures that are able to visualize it and use it and make more balls because of it. And again, I don't push that, even though I'm able to teach it. What's important to me is to make sure that you're able to get on the shot line. And again, I would say probably 95 to 98% of the lessons I've taught in the last 4 years, when people come to me and say they have problems making balls or they have problems aiming, it's almost never their aim. It's usually their stroke. I did have one or two people that I'm not sure what they were seeing, but they, even after repetitive attempts, they just could not, we had to really work at that to get them to see the ball properly. So.
I got a question.
Yep.
How much accuracy do you give to those people that like to use the light spot on the object ball as the aiming point? Is it true?
Yeah, so again, I don't know. I'm going to try to repeat the questions for the people that are watching. Hopefully there is somebody watching. So Jake asked about the kind of the aiming system that has to do with the light reflections on the balls. So there is an aiming system. I wouldn't maybe call it a system, but kind of a technique, right? If you even look, it's very hard for you guys to see, especially remotely. But when I'm looking at this ball right now, I see the 4 lights reflected in that ball. And there is a technique where they try to say, as I walk around here, those lights kind of shift. And so if I if I look at where the contact point is for that ball, it is right kind of underneath where that fourth light is showing on there. So I don't know all the ins and outs of that system. Again, it breaks down under different lighting conditions and different angles, but yeah, people use it, right? So again, it's just like Shane, right? He sat in his basement in South Dakota. He's the best player in the world, and he uses some shaft aiming system, and he swears up and down that he never heard of the other shaft aiming system that was out there already, but he does it a little different, and he's been very obscure when he talks about it, but it's his system. It works for him. And if you ever watch him play in any of these big tournaments, when he has a long, tough shot, especially if he's really playing good, it doesn't matter. But if he's playing kind of normal and he has a long, tough shot, if you guys watch, he sits there and he takes these practice strokes and he sits there like this for 3-4 seconds. And he's drawing the line back and forth between, the 1/8 inch inside of the edge of his shaft to whatever point on the ball he's looking at. And for him, he knows through repetition that works. So yeah, by all means, you can even walk up here if you want. Like as I'm rolling this cue ball, the lights are staying right on the ball, right? They're not moving around. They're oriented the same way all the time. So again, like Jeremy even says, I wasn't aware of that, but like I said, it really doesn't matter how you do it. If you can find a technique that helps you see the shot. Like I said, I'm more lax than a lot of the teachers are, where they're like, oh, you must aim this way. Like I say, go for it. If you have a way of accurately seeing the shot, then use whatever you use, and sometimes use different things on different shots if you have to.
The way that I learned, it's depending on which pockets you're shooting in, depends on which way you draw that line through the cue ball. All you do is you use that light to draw your line through the center of the cue ball, and then you don't look at nothing else. You just use that solely.
Yeah, if I look at this, I can see that it's right. This particular one is like right at the contact point, but yeah.
Never used the light on the cue ball. I've always used the light on the object ball. You say you're using the light on the cue ball also?
I'm not, but are you? Or are you using the lights on the object ball?
It depends on the shot. It depends on who teaches you the system. And it's really more for just lining up. You're right. I still use a contact. I use that like if I'm having trouble finding the shot line, then I use that to orient my body to the shot, and then I slide in, and I'm still using a contact point. So.
I was just curious. You talked about the shadow usage, and I didn't know if you used the light.
Yeah, and the shadows I've seen used a couple different ways. Again, they're part of the C system or the Samba system that my friend in Germany invented, and I use that system on most of my shots. There's also another way to kind of use it where people just look at the object ball and just try to use those different parts of the shadows to aim with. And again, to me, whatever gets you locked in on the shot, it's kind of like kicking systems. I've seen people that kick, and I'm consider myself an expert in kicking systems. I've studied a bunch of them, probably 40, 50, 60 of them, and I've seen people that kick pretty well, and when they explain to me how they're kicking, it's not mathematically correct, but they make these subtle adjustments and it works for them. So again, I don't try to say, oh, you're wrong, do it this way instead. As long as they can kick the ball, it's fine. Mika Immonen was here a couple years ago, and I don't think he knows any kicking systems, but he will reverse engineer his kicks to the point where, it's flawless. It's amazing. And he'll hit a 4-rail kick without knowing any systems or anything, but he looks at this angle, then he comes over here and looks at this angle and just sort of backs it up based on experience. So can't fault that at all. A couple of the things with aiming. So regardless of these aiming systems, and again, it'd be a little easier to do some of this one-on-one. So when we're done with the clinic, as always, I'll be up here for a couple hours. If you guys want to come up and talk about any of the systems or stand over my shoulder to see what I'm looking at or anything, feel free to do that, please. So when we're talking about aiming, let's talk about collision-induced throw right away, because that's probably the biggest thing that gets people when they're aiming. If I'm hitting a ball that's relatively straight on, there's really no collision-induced throw. I'm hitting the ball pretty straight. The ball kind of just goes down the line that it's supposed to go. Everything's fine. If I'm 5 or 10 degrees away, there's very, very, very little collision-induced throw. So again, I can pretty much aim exactly where the traditional aiming point would have me aim, and everything's going to be fine. As you start to get to like a 30-degree or a 40-degree cut shot, as I hit this ball, what happens is the cue ball comes down here, it hits this ball. It may hit it perfectly right down the back of the contact point, but as it hits this ball, it grabs it for just a split second, and it kind of takes it with it a little bit, right, because of the friction, and it'll alter the line slightly before the ball gets released. And they've shown that on high-speed video. It happens very, very quickly. So when the cue ball comes down here, what that means is when I hit the ball perfectly where I want to be aimed, the ball might actually hit over here. Now, if it's close to the pocket, the effect is minimized, and that's true for all shots that you shoot, right? When we're aiming on shots that are close to the pocket, you have the pocket's roughly twice the size of the ball, sometimes even bigger on easy tables. So I have this huge range right here that I can hit. I can hit to the outside of this pocket or kind of hit the rail a little bit and bounce in. But if this ball is way back here, that angle just continues to widen and widen as the distance goes out. So I have to be more accurate the farther away I am from the pocket. And the collision-induced throw is going to throw the ball a certain amount. I believe it throws the ball roughly an inch for every foot of travel. So, and again, that's an estimate. So if I'm 2 feet away and I come in like this, it may only throw it off an inch. Well, if I'm aimed at the center of the pocket, that means my ball still goes in, but just goes in the left side of the pocket. But if I'm 6 feet away, that means I might miss the ball by 6 inches, which is enough to totally miss the shot. So you have to, I think most pool players are unaware of collision-induced throw, especially like at a typical league level. And I think most people also automatically compensate for it without even knowing they're compensating for it through trial and error. They miss a shot thick, they miss a shot thick, they do it enough times, they start aiming a little thinner, and the ball goes in. There are things you can do to minimize the collision-induced throw. It's going to be hard for me to demonstrate this. I'm going to try, but I'm automatically trying to not miss the ball, and I don't want to just miss it on purpose to kind of show you, but hopefully you can kind of see these balls are pretty polished and pretty clean, which, by the way, the dirtier the balls are, the more the effect takes place because of the friction. So the cleaner the balls are, the less the collision-induced throw comes in. But if I hit this ball soft, matter of fact, this is the shot that comes up kind of the most that I see. People have a shot like this, and they hit this ball, they try to hit it really soft because they want to ease the ball into the hole. And so if I aim this, try to watch the one and see if it grabs a little bit. Usually it's a little noticeable. Okay, see how I kind of grabbed it and threw it toward the rail? I hit the ball right where I wanted to, but because I hit the ball so soft, and because I'm at this 45-degree angle, which is about the worst for collision-induced throw, it's going to grab that ball a little bit and kind of take it toward the rail. So if I hit that same shot in the same spot and just hit a little more speed, okay, so it went straight down the rail now. So I see a lot of people, when they have these types of shots, I'm not suggesting you hit the ball hard, but put a nice natural roll on the cue ball, some natural follow, and give it enough speed to maybe come halfway up the table or all the way up the table. That's the most accurate way to make the shot. So if I try to hit this really soft to hold it up, you can just see it wants to go toward the rail. And I see a ton of people, especially, and they convince themselves when they're playing 8-ball that that's okay because they left the ball in the pocket. Well, I'd rather the ball go in the pocket than leave it in front of the pocket. So now again, sometimes you have another ball and you're trying to hold it for that ball or something, and so people try to hit this really soft and straight on, and then that's kind of what happens. So it's much better off to take a bigger cut, maybe have the cue ball land here and have a reasonable shot afterwards. Sometimes, depending on the layout of the table, you can go up and down the table, and that's better. You can get a cleaner hit. The other thing you can do is you can use a little bit of gearing English. So in this case, if I use a little bit of outside English, which in this case would be right English, it's going to offset that friction. So the friction's trying to grab it and take it toward the rail. The right English is going to try to twist it away from the rail, and the two will sort of cancel each other out with the right amount of gearing English. And Dr. Dave has a huge thing on his site, if you want to get into all the physics of it. Talks about how much gearing English to use at different angles, and if you want to memorize all that, that's great. But the bottom line is you need some gearing English if you're not going to adjust for it. The other way to adjust for collision-induced throw is to hit the ball a little thinner. So if I know if I hit it at the normal spot, it's going to drag it toward the rail, well, maybe I need to pretend like I'm hitting the ball out to the outer edge of the pocket, and then it's going to grab it and actually go into the pocket. On a shot like this, if I needed to get, like, say, right here, because of other balls in the way or whatever, I would probably use, especially when I'm this close, I would use a little bit of right English just to try to help throw it. So that time it hit the rail, but it didn't hit the rail quite as much, and I was still able to hit the ball pretty soft and get it to stop. So again, collision-induced throw, like say from back here, this is a difficult shot anyways, but if not in the side, but let's say you're trying to cut it down in the pocket, if I look at my kind of my ghost ball representation, right, if I have somebody hit that 8-ball perfectly, they will miss this shot most of the time, because it's going to grab it and it's going to end up hitting like probably right here on the rail. So again, use a little bit of outside left English in this case, which makes the shot a little tougher, or try to use a naturally rolling cue ball. When you use follow or draw, it actually offsets the collision-induced throw a little bit because it glances off the ball a little bit quicker, just a little, and it might make a difference between getting 4 inches of throw versus 2 inches of throw. The worst is shot. So basically, if I hit it where the ball's starting to roll backwards and right at contact it's just sliding, that's the largest effective throw. It can be up to 5 degrees, which is more than enough to miss some of the shots. If you ever watch any of the matches on YouTube, when a pro, has a shot like this, and let's say their next shot is right here. Again, there could be other, but they are almost never going to hit this ball and try to kill it and try to get the cue ball to land like right there. Almost never, because it's just such a touchy shot. You're hitting that draw drag stroke, and if it grabs, if the ball's dirty, if there's a piece of chalk on the ball, they could easily miss the shot. So almost all the time, they're going to use a nice center ball hit and come across the table like that. I didn't have to hit it hard. I just hit a normal medium speed stroke, but it offset the collision-induced throw. I was able to hit the ball where I wanted to hit it and got perfect position. Trying to hold that ball up with some spinny draw type of shot, if you're nervous at all, your hand's going to, it's just not a good idea. And a lot of people are afraid to hit that ball like that. They're worried about scratching in the side or going further down table. And the answer for that is practice, right? You just have to learn from different angles how to get that ball to come straight across the table.
And that was center ball?
It was like a stun stroke. So we'll talk about that next week or next month, but whatever you need to get the ball kind of sliding at contact a little bit, yeah. So if I was 5 feet away, I may need to be like a tip below center to get it sliding. If I'm close, then I could probably hit almost exactly at center ball. Yep.
T is the distance to get to the stun.
To get it to the stun, exactly. Yep. Yep. That one I probably was just a hair under center.
Gotcha.
Yep.
But you said you didn't want it sliding, though, that you wanted
The speed, though, you're right. But the speed, it probably wasn't exactly sliding, but the speed also counteracts the collision-induced throw. So when you hit the ball a little harder, it glances a little quicker. So yeah, you're right. In general, when you're hitting it soft, you don't want to hit a stun shot.
That's a good little drill right there then.
I've done it once or twice before, yeah. It's actually Ralph Eckert when he was here. He's amazing. He just in a couple hours, I actually enjoyed, of all the pros that came here, and I've met a number of them before that and after that, but that was the first time I'd met him. And of all the pros that came here, he was probably, I'm trying to think if there's anybody else, but he was probably my favorite. He's very good trainer. A lot of the pro players are not necessarily great instructors. He's a great instructor, and he had a drill where I think he put a ball like this, and we would have balls like this, and the goal was to like hit this ball, and matter of fact, I think they were half a diamond like this. So the goal was to hit this ball, come over here between these balls, and then, you know, come back across. And we moved them, you know, all the way up the table like that. So you might have a shot like this, where you're trying to come, you know, between these balls from that shot. And so you learn how to use all the different English and speeds and everything to hit all these different spots. And it was a nice visual versus trying to be really precise and putting the ball here. You know, oftentimes in a game, if you're pretty close, you're getting the right angle, you're getting the right results. So it was nice having like a gate like that where you could just see. And we worked in pairs and we scored everybody, and it was kind of a fun exercise. Sure. So collision induced throw is a big one. Again, the farther the ball is away from the pocket, don't be afraid of it. Just realize you have to be a little more accurate because, again, any inaccuracy is going to widen out as you go down the rail. So if you're 2 feet away, you might make the shot. If you're 6 feet away, you might miss the shot. Another big thing that I see people having a problem with is the effective pocket size. So the pockets are actually pointed not at the center of the table like a lot of people kind of think. They're actually pointed right at the spot on the table. And you can see kind of where the spot would be right about here. They're pointing at the side pockets. They're pointing right at that spot. So when I have an object ball right here, that is the biggest effective pocket I can shoot into. I have the full width of the pocket to shoot the ball into. When I'm coming from center table, I still have a pretty good sized pocket, but let's call it like 90% of the pocket, right? And when I'm shooting from a rail, again, on an easy bar table, on an easy bar table or a forgiving table, new cloth, whatever, yes, you can hit off the rail and it'll slide down the table and go in the pocket. But if you just look at the true pocket size on a normal table, it's probably about 2/3 of a pocket. And if you hit it hard, it's probably like half a pocket. And since the pocket's like, the ball is 2 1/4 inches and the pocket's maybe 4 1/2, I mean, you're talking hitting almost exactly where you have to hit to get the ball to take. And if these facings on the rubber have any kind of curve to them at all, you could end up not even being able to make a ball, almost like on a Chinese 8-ball table or a snooker table at pace. You may have to hit it soft. And the other thing to go along with that effective pocket size is just to be aware of that, because again, when I have a ball here on the rail and my cue ball's right here, I try to minimize the times that I'm hitting this ball very firmly. I want to hit this with like a smooth stroke, medium at most. There are times where you have to kind of hit it hard and swing it around the table. Again, I try to really minimize that. I play at a decent level. I don't play enough where I feel comfortable hitting that ball, 15, 20 miles an hour and trying to jam it in the hole and move the cue ball all over the table. Even the pros, that shot becomes quite missable if you amp up on your speed. So I try to hit it as smooth as possible. Now again, when you're out here, now if you need to hit the ball really hard to create an angle or move the ball around the table, you have a much bigger effective pocket size to be able to do that. And the last thing I want to talk about with this is where the actual entry point of the pocket should be. I'll try to use a piece of chalk. Sometimes in lessons I'll use the little hole reinforcers. But everybody sort of aims at this big hole, right? And the hole, the center of it, is right here. Well, hopefully this will be picked up. But if you look at where that 6 ball is, if I draw a line to where my cue is, it's going to hit the rail like right there. So what people do is they aim kind of at this hole, and they end up hitting the rail on the way in. And again, when they're learning, they're playing in bars or playing on easy tables, it kind of works. When they transition to a Pro Cut Brunswick or a diamond table or something, all of a sudden they miss all their shots and they don't know why. So the key is you have to actually aim at a point between the 2 points on the pocket. So if I put this piece of chalk right in between, and again, I've seen a lot of people use hole reinforcers and actually put them on the table and leave them there. So now, if I look at the path the 6 ball takes, it comes down like this, it rolls over the chalk, it's actually going to hit the facing and drop in the pocket. And I still have a little bit of leeway on this side because I can kind of hit the rail and hit the facing, but that is my effective aim spot. So if I'm right here, you almost look like you're aiming right into the middle of this facing. And that's really where you should be aiming, not over here, because that's actually going to hit way up here on the rail and, again, very likely to miss the ball. So when I see people that tend to bobble balls, they'll blame it on hitting a draw stroke. They're blaming it on hitting the ball too hard, which is all possibly true. The draw, not so much, but the hitting the ball hard because of the draw. But again, a lot of times it's just as simple as reorientating somebody's visualization of the shot and getting them to aim properly over the proper part of the pocket. Any questions on the aiming? So you're supposed to ask a question while I check my phone. So I want to make sure I didn't miss anything so far. Oh, yep, good. Glad I checked. So one more thing I want to talk about. And again, my goal here today, I know it's not going to be completely inclusive, but my goal is to try to be as inclusive as possible with all the information you need to be able to make balls. Notice I haven't talked about English at all. English is not necessary to pocket balls. Okay, so I know a lot of people love to use a little bit of outside English on all their cut shots. There's even people who like to use a little bit of inside English on all their cut shots. You want to do that, you're making your life a lot more complicated than mine is, and it's already complicated enough. So I used to be one of those guys. When I grew up playing, I was a tennis player, a golfer. I was fascinated with spin. When I got on a pool table, within probably 2 months, I was trying to see how much spin how big I could draw it and try all these crazy shots. The color of money coming out the year I played pool probably didn't help. But so I cut balls in like this, 5 ball. I cut balls in like that with outside English for 15 years. And I got a little older and a little wiser, and I quit for about 7 or 8 years. And when I took up the game again, I just really started studying a lot more, and I realized that there's just no reason to do that. Now, if I need outside English on it to pull the ball back up this way, that's great. But if I'm just pocketing the ball, if Paul says, "Hey, here's $1,000 to make that shot," I'll tell you right now, I'm not putting any English on the cue ball to make it. I'm gonna hit it with center ball. Now, it may not be exactly center. It may be a little bit of follow, a little bit of draw, but it's going to be on the center axis. One exception to the rule about the English is rail shots. So, if you're shooting a rail shot and you're fairly straight to, let's say, about 10 degrees, roughly about right here, you don't really need any English at all to make the ball, and you really want to hit the ball on the rail about the same time. You want to almost hit the shot just like if the rail wasn't there. Just ignore it completely, just hit the ball normal. When you're from 10 degrees to about 30 or 40, which would be out here, oh, I can hear myself. So when you're here, you don't need the English, but a lot of people like using English because it seems to help them out make the shot. What you do need to do when you get from 10 to about 45 degrees is you want to hit the rail slightly first. So what will happen is when the ball's here, when you hit the rail slightly first, it'll actually compress into the rail a little bit and come out and hit the ball. And what that does is that minimizes that contact-induced throw again, right? If I hit the ball and the rail at the same time, what's happening is it's hitting the ball, it's throwing it into the rail because of the collision-induced throw, and then it's going to come off the rail. And again, a lot of times people miss the ball. So when you're aiming at these angles, you don't need the inside English, but you want to hit the rail just slightly before the ball. Using inside English will still help you a little bit. When you start to get into these more extreme angles, it's actually pretty difficult to make the ball without using inside English. It can be done, but the inside English makes it a lot easier. And again, you want to hit the rail slightly before the ball. The inside English will turn the cue ball toward the ball and make the contact, give you a bigger margin for error on the contact. If I try to hit this with no English, again, it's makeable, but it's much easier to make it with inside. I almost don't even have to, I mean, if you notice, I don't hardly aim the shot. If I had to hit that with center or with outside for some reason, I would be standing over the ball for a good 5 or 6 seconds trying to make sure it was as accurate as possible. And then when you get into these really extreme angles, the ball can still be made almost all the way up to 90 degrees, even at 90 degrees. But again, now you need like a lot of English, like maximum. And again, hitting the rail a little bit before the ball. I'm not going to attempt to do this because I think I'm like 3 for 3 right now. But you know, I've all seen these proposition shots where guys will shoot this ball from here and make the 2 ball in either corner. I've seen people shoot it from here. I've seen people put it up on a piece of chalk and make it from here. I've even seen there's a guy in Asia, very easy table, but still it's pretty impressive. I think his cue ball was here, and he cut the 2 ball backward in that corner. That would never work on this table, but on the table he was playing on, it was still pretty impressive that he hit the ball as hard as he did. Hit it. I mean, he might have hit it 100 times. It doesn't matter. I wouldn't even want to try it. So again, when I play, I'm not into trying to shoot too many trick shots when I'm shooting pool and trying to win a match. But so if I was here, I would probably choose another option. But if I was here, depending on the layout of the table and the score of the match and all that, it might be a feasible option for me to try hitting this with some inside English and trying to cut it in. And certainly if I was, you know, down here, in some ways this shot is actually a little bit easier for an amateur to hit probably than when it's a little bit off the rail. When it's a little bit off the rail, you've got to hit it much cleaner. You actually have a little bit wider margin for error when it's frozen. So I get a lot of questions sometimes on rail shots. So does that make sense as far as how to hit them and the English to use and all that?
When you say inside English, that's to the side of the rail.
Yeah, so I try to use inside or outside instead of left or right because it depends on the shot. So yeah, so if I'm cutting the ball to the left, then the inside English is left. It's to the inside of the cut angle. So if this is the cut angle, anything on this side of the cut angle is inside, and then that side is outside. And it kind of makes intuitive sense, right? Because if I'm coming at the ball like this with left, when it hits the rail, it's going to spin into the ball. You don't want it coming away from the ball.
So Scott, when you have a shot that isn't on the rail, you were saying that you try not to use English if there's not a positioning thing in place. So how do you offset the collision-induced throw? Just by adjusting for it as opposed to using English?
Yeah, so the question was not using English on cut shots and then offsetting for the collision-induced throw. So part of that is keeping the speed up a little bit. Part of that is just experience, right? And knowing that the ball has to be hit just a hair thinner than normal. I will tell you that I don't consciously give it a lot of thought. I certainly do miss a ball every once in a while, a little thick. So if I have a shot like this, right, this is about a 15-degree cut, I don't think about using any sort of gearing English or anything like that on this shot. So let's just say I was trying to hit this ball and trying to play shape for the 6. So I just want to hit this and kind of draw off the rail and kind of come back out here. I don't. A lot of people will just automatically use low left on this shot and put some English on it. So if I'm hitting it, I don't really even think about. I'm right in the center of the cue ball. So I don't need to use any English to get the position of where I was trying to get. Now, if I need it to be like, say, hit this diamond, then I'm going to put some left English on it because I want that angle to open up to do it. But yeah, even normal shots, if I think I shot something like this before, right? If I have a shot like this, by hitting follow and hitting at like a nice smooth speed, it's going to really minimize the collision-induced throw. And if I make a bad stroke at it and kind of punch it a little and it's slidey a little bit, or if I hit it a little soft, you can almost see it on dirty balls especially. You can see it grab a little bit. And it is easy to miss then. I almost feel like when I hit a shot like this, again, position notwithstanding, I almost just feel like when I hit a nice rolling ball that I can almost feel like it's glancing off the object ball and pushing it down the line as opposed to grabbing it. So, when I'm here like this, I just try to hit a little bit above center and just, so even if you see my cue ball, it's rolling straight. That 8-ball's rolling right toward the pocket. It didn't grab at all. If I hit that with like a stun shot, it might grab a little bit. And then, to be fair, there are some shots where I guess as you become a better player, there's certain shots that you just get a little nervous about and you think it might do that. So sometimes, yes, I'll put a little bit of, and when I say a little bit of English, we're talking like an eighth of a tip, a quarter of a tip. I have some students sometimes where I'll tell them, okay, we'll use a little right English on this, and I see their cues like, way out here or something. So it's like on this shot, if I wanted to use a little bit of left English, especially with a low deflection shaft, whether it be a Predator, OB, whatever, if I'm center ball right here and I just come over just a little, I mean, you can almost barely see my tip move. You can see the ball's just turning just a little bit, but it was enough of a gearing English where it's going to offset some of that collision-induced throw. All right. So I think the last thing, I don't know, how are we doing on time, Paul?
11.
Okay, perfect. I was trying not to go like 2 hours today. So the last thing I want to cover, now there are some other things. We're going to cover this in the future. I want to try to cram too much today. What I would say is there's other ways to make a ball. I think I kind of talked about aiming. We talked about the rail shots and some of the challenges with the aiming. You can definitely learn how to bank the ball, kick a ball in, massés, curve shots, all those kind of funky things. I would tell you can become a pretty darn good player, and not banking, yes, and kicking you have to learn for defense. But if you never learn to hit a massé shot, you never learn to hit a curve shot, you'll be just fine. So it's great to add all the little tricks into your arsenal, but that's not something I'm going to focus on as far as a method of pocketing balls. I will cover it. I'm going to do a class in the future on kicking and banking, and then another one we'll cover some jumping and some curve shots. But it's not something to be too. There's almost always another solution than worrying about that. What I do want to cover is my favorite topic, because I suck at it, is combinations, caroms, and billiards. I am absolutely horrible at these. I don't know why. I attribute it to reading The Science of Pocket Billiards when I was probably 20, 21 years old, and reading all the physics behind them and learning exactly how difficult combinations are, and that stuck in my head, and now I make them quite difficult. Sometimes can be really bad. And ironically, like I tell everyone else to put some time into it, I got so frustrated after missing a couple in a match a few months ago that I spent about half an hour one day hitting combinations, and I've made like 50% of them now, where I was like at 10%, not even lying. My playing partners were laughing at me. It was so bad. So just talk a little bit about some basic combinations. So obviously, if you're sitting here, even I'm usually pretty good at those. So the whole theory behind the combination is you want to hit one object ball into another object ball. So there's a couple techniques for aiming them. One way is to get behind the object ball and aim it as if it was the cue ball and look at that shot. And then again, you can picture the ghost ball. You can come back about an inch from the ball and picture that as your aim spot that you want to roll the cue ball over. Some people will look at the object ball and look at the line and project the line all the way through the ball to see where they want to aim the two ball, and then they aim the two, let's say at this part of the rail or that part of the pocket. Again, however you want to aim them is fine. One of the challenges with this is when you're pocketing, if I'm just pocketing the 2 ball here, I can hit it into the left side of the pocket, middle of the pocket, or the right side of the pocket. When I'm hitting a combination, I have to hit almost exactly where the back of that 5 ball is. So my margin for error is much smaller. And I'm sure with me being a perfectionist and being as analytical as I am, I'm sure that's what causes me to miss all these, because I'll get down and I'll just convince myself that all these random effects are going to happen, and I try to compensate for things that aren't there. Putt, right? It's always got to can't be straight. It's got to curve one way or the other, and I've missed more putts that way too. So anyways, you do have to account for collision-induced throw. One key difference with combinations is you can't affect the ball you're hitting with the other object ball. So if it's a cue ball, right, I can put some right spin on it, some left spin, some follow, some draw. I don't have that choice when I'm using another object ball for a combination. This ball is going to skid, and then it's going to attain natural roll at some point. I can't really influence this ball in any way. I can transfer a little bit of left or right English on it, but not enough to really matter. So because that ball is kind of going to be sliding, you do have to sometimes hit the combinations a little thinner than what you would anticipate. Now this is pretty easy, but if I have a combo like this, if I aim that 2 at my typical spot, I'm going to get collision-induced throw. And it's going to take that ball and grab it and push it toward the rail. So I have to aim this combination just a little thinner than I would think. And again, if the cue ball is like here or on this side, it's much more difficult, because now you've actually got collision-induced throw on this ball too. So it just becomes this whole, I don't want to screw you guys up on combinations, but it becomes a whole science project trying to figure out how to get that ball to hit exactly there. Now, guys that play a lot of ring games, people that play 8-ball a lot, straight pull, 1 pocket, these things come up a lot more. I'm kind of primarily been a rotation player, 9-ball, 10-ball, or 15-ball rotation. These things just don't come up that much. If I had a shot like this, my first thought is not to fire that 2 into the 5 and try to make the 5. My first thought is to play safe or cut the 2 or do something, anything other than that combination. So that being said, if you have a shot like this and you get reasonably in good line for it, again, I'm going to show my inaccuracy here maybe. So for what I've been doing lately is I'll look at this, I'll try to aim it just a little thinner, and I'm looking at where the 2 is going to hit the rail. So I'm just looking at kind of that spot right there, and I'm just going to do everything I can to put the 2 in that spot and just kind of let whatever happens, happens. See, said I was horrible. Now again, I don't have to shoot them very much. A great drill for this is to put like all 15 balls out on the table, like half a table, and just take ball in hand and just start shooting combinations. Just pick a combination and shoot it, pick another one, shoot it, and just practice. Like I said, for me, I just I start kind of moving a little bit. I can feel myself, and I don't do that on my normal shots, but it just always looks bad to me. Okay, 50%, that's not bad. Now, of course, if you have like easier combos, I mean, that's great. So when they're, if they're kind of dead, I mean, that's kind of nice when it works out that way. But certainly you want to minimize the times that you're, firing at a combo like this, trying to do that. Now, again, there are times in 9-ball even where you can do it and still play safe at the same time and kind of take a free shot at the 9, especially if the table's kind of messed up somewhere else. So sometimes I'll even do it, take an advantage. I don't really put a lot of emphasis on making the combo. I'm putting the emphasis on the safe part, but if the 9 goes in, great. There's also time playing 8-ball where your opponent's got all his or her balls there and you're shooting and you've got nothing left. You've got to make the 8. It's very hard to play safe. So sometimes, you have to try to shoot some sort of a carom shot or a billiard shot or something like that, which I'll talk about in a minute. I want to talk a little bit about frozen combinations. So if the balls are frozen or close to frozen, and that's a key point, if they're like a 1/16 or an eighth of an inch apart, they're still going to act as if they're frozen. So right now, this combination is facing toward the outside edge of the, I'm going to actually face it a little more. Okay, so right now this combination is aimed right here. So about an inch outside the outside edge of the pocket. So if I hit the 5 on the left side of the ball, it's going to twist the ball a little bit, which is going to give the 8 the opposite twist, and it's going to throw it in the opposite direction. So if you have a 2-ball combination, and if I want the 8 ball to go to the right, I want to hit the front ball, the 5 ball, on the left. And the most throw I can get is from a soft shot and hitting this 5 about 45 degrees, so about half the ball. If I hit the 5 fuller, it's going to transfer less English. If I hit it thin, it's going to transfer less English. So if I want the maximum throw, I want it to be about halfway. And again, soft. If I hit it hard, it's not going to throw as much. So I'm going to hit this one at about not quite half the ball, and I'm going to hit it kind of at a just a normal speed, because I really only need it to throw about an inch. Okay, so it threw from here an inch outside the pocket, almost right into the center of the pocket. Now again, same principles we talked about before. If you're further up the table like this, it will appear as if you're able to throw the ball more, but it's really just extending that throw angle. So now I'm gonna face this. Okay. So now it's about halfway. It's about right here. So this would be challenging, especially since these balls are pretty clean. But I think I might be able to get it to throw that much. So I'm going to try to hit it about half the ball, half the 5 ball, and try to hit it pretty soft. Okay, so I got it to throw from here to there, just with that little bit of that stroke. So you can try to put a little English on the cue ball. It'll transfer 2 to 3% of the English to the other ball, but it's far more important to hit on the proper side of the combination. I've seen people with these types of shots okay. So this is aimed right about here. And so if I hit this combination from up here, I cannot make it. Because when I hit it on this side of the ball, it's going to push the 10 more down toward the rail. I have to hit it on this side of the 5 to get the 10 to go to the left. So if I somehow am playing position and I get above this ball, I cannot make it from here. So what I would have to do is I'd have to kick into the rail and try to hit the 5 on this and to go the proper way. And if it's perfectly wired right into the pocket, again, if I hit down this way on this side of the ball, it's going to push the 10. So I need to make sure I make contact as close to behind the 5 ball as I can to be able to make the combination. Any questions on the throw effects for frozen combinations? Okay. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this proposition bet. This is like an old gambler's kind of proposition bet, just to kind of demonstrate what I was just talking about. So you look at the 5 and the 10, right? They're lined up perfectly down the rail. Does anybody think that they, so you got cue ball anywhere you want, does anybody think they can make the 10 down in that pocket? I know you want to try, Jeremy.
Yeah, I kind of do. Yeah.
Here?
I'll try.
Somebody go ahead. So again, the 5 and the 10 are completely dead while you're down to the pocket. And these balls are actually clean, so you're probably getting the best chance possible that's not representing what typical it looks like in a pool hall.
Can I try one?
Feel free. No, that's good.
Probably can't happen.
No jumping over the 1 ball and hitting the 5.
Yeah, you can't shoot from behind the one and make
I can see his wheels turning.
Can't make it. Here, you make it.
The secret.
you gotta get the 1 ball out of the way and hit the 5 into the 9 or into the 10.
Oh, no fair. You switched the 1 and the 10.
Well, that's okay.
Doesn't matter.
I know.
Anybody know what I did?
Yeah.
I wasn't very sly about it because I'm not a hustler, but
You licked it. You licked it.
so you wet the contact point, it reduces the friction, and so that throw effect doesn't happen. Ball goes straight down the rail. So there used to be guys back in the day that would put little, like, rough up some chalk and make it friction more. They'd wet it, and so it's kind of the old like hustler's trick, but it's very effective in demonstrating how the throw works. When you have a 3-ball combination like that, there is no way to get out of that throw because that ball is already positioned where it's going to be. It's going to throw the ball exactly the way the cue ball would if you hit it there. There's no way to get around it unless you tell them to look away and you cheat real
Do
quick.
it again and wet it. I want to see that. I didn't catch it the first time. We all want that to go.
Yeah, see, that's not very sly. Usually they're like when they put it down really.
You lick the front ball.
Yeah, so I get it right on the contact point. And then basically, like I said, it gets rid of that throw effect. It goes right down there. That one deviated a little bit. I used water on the first one, so.
That might get you a black eye.
Yeah, I haven't gotten any black eyes playing pool. I try not to do that, so.
I have my fair share of them.
But it's kind of funny because a lot of a lot of the proposition shots and a lot of these old hustler type moves. It's based in the physics of the game. I mean, there's no magical thing somebody possesses. Even the best trick shot artists in the world, like Venom and Larry Neville back in the day and Mike Massey. I mean, they're just able to move their cue at an amazing speed and hit super low or high on the outside limits of the cue ball with accuracy. That's all. If you sat there and practiced 8 hours a day and did that, I mean, there's nothing like magical about it. It's all about technique. Okay, so that's combinations and frozen combinations. The last 2 things I want to talk about is caroms and billiards, and I hope I get this right. So carom and billiard is used almost interchangeably. A carom is technically when you hit an object ball off another object ball. So something like this. 3 balls sitting here. So the combination is when we hit the 3 into the 10 and make the 10. The carom is going to be hitting the 3 off the 10 into the corner. So what you really want to do is kind of line up that tangent line, and it'll kind of give you an idea of how thick you need to hit the 3 into the 10. And I'm bad at these 2. Yay, 50% again. That's good. So, there's nothing too tricky to that. The main thing to think about when you're hitting carom shots, when the ball is close to the pocket, it's pretty easy. Got a wide range of error. But if it's further from the pocket, you have to realize that when this first object ball is traveling, it's going to pick up natural roll, which means when it hits the contact point, it's actually going to have a little follow on it, and it's going to roll forward of the tangent line. So you would have to take that into account. I've seen Efren, and the Filipinos are fantastic at this. You know, again, have a ball like this. So if I'm shooting this 10 into the 4, and I look at my tangent line, figure out where I want to aim, if I hit this slow, when the 10 hits, it could go down the tangent line and kind of curve forward a little bit because of the follow. So in order to avoid that, what you want is you want the 10 to be sliding at contact, which means you got to hit it a little firmer. So assuming I can aim this right, which is unlikely, yay, 66%. So you hit it a little harder so that it goes down the tangent line and doesn't have a chance to follow forward. The last thing I want to talk about is a billiard. Now, a billiard is where the cue ball hits off another ball, and then the cue ball itself makes the second ball. I'm a little bit better at these from playing 3-cushion billiards. Let me see if I can get a good angle here. So the advantage of these is that you have, this is kind of when it comes up a lot. The advantage of this is that you have the full use of the cue ball. I can put left English, right English, follow, draw on the ball to all. Might be something like this, right? I'm on the inside edge of the ball. So again, I kind of look at my tangent line, and I want to do something like this, and just right, and make that billiard. Again, typically when you're doing these, you're trying to hit a ball that's close to the pocket or something like that. One nice little system for these. Now, what I just did was hit the ball pretty thin, and you can pretty much follow the tangent line down the shot to the ball. Sometimes, either for position reasons or maybe because there's balls in the way, you have to go through the ball. So when you're hitting a billiard, there's always two paths to the ball. You can hit the thin tangent line path, or you can go through the ball and change the angle that way. So I'll orientate this 5 in such a way that it's pointing right at the ball. So one of the little tricks you can use is if I look at the front of the ball, so here's where it's pointed. I look at the front of the ball where it's aimed. If I aim my cue ball at the front spot with a medium like a follow stroke, it's a good kind of a gauge to figure out how thick to hit the ball with follow. So I'm going to aim. Now again, you can't do this in a game, but just for visual purposes, I'm going to aim right at the front of that ball. And just a nice smooth follow stroke. And you can see when it hits, it's going to follow through the ball. Okay, so it's not going to work from all angles and all speeds, but it works pretty well as a guideline. So again, if I had a billiard and my cue ball was here, again, I could hit thin off this, but it's going to want to follow forward to the tangent line. This one is going to be tough because it's probably going to follow through the ball a little bit. Okay, so it's a good guideline, I guess. I wouldn't call it a system, but it's a good guideline to use. And again, with some practice and some speed control, you notice I hit it kind of the same speed. If I had to hit it harder, then I'm going to have to aim a little thinner. If I hit it softer, I may have to, But it's a good guideline for those types of shots. And again, the more you play straight pool or 8-ball or those types of games, those types of shots come up a lot more. I'm very rarely hitting those types of shots playing 9-ball or 10-ball, but it's still good to know those basics.
If you've got 2 frozen balls and your intent is to put the carom in, not the second ball.
Yep.
Does the carom throw?
Yeah. So the question was, with frozen combinations, if there's a way to make the ball you're hitting and not the second ball. So there is. again, I don't practice these, but there is a way to do that. So let's say on this shot here, I look at my tangent line, and the 2 ball is lined up right here. So if I hit the ball rather full and use draw, I can impart a little bit of follow to the 2 ball. And what happens is it gets a little bit of follow, and because it's squeezed by that second ball, it'll actually roll forward of its tangent line. So again, I always like to do these things interactively, and which means I may completely screw this up, but we'll see. So if I try to force that ball through, it's kind of a judgment call as to how hard to hit it and how full to hit it. So I'm going to try to hit it pretty full with a little bit of draw and see if I can get it to go forward. Okay, so I'm like 4 for 5 now. That's pretty good. So that forced through the ball about 3 inches from that spot. Now there's a famous shot, and a lot of one-pocket players know this because it comes up a lot, and a few other games too, but most people don't shoot it in other games, where the balls are frozen like this, and you can force this front ball into one of the pockets. And that's a pretty severe throw because the tangent line's actually pointed almost straight across the table. I'll give it one shot just to see if you can see the effect, even if it doesn't go in the pocket. Hopefully you can see that it goes forward of the tangent line. I'm actually pretty happy with that one because I don't think I've shot that shot for like probably 15 years. So, so you can see, like, again, and the guys that draw and speed, right? And the people that play one pocket, they will practice that shot. There's a certain technique. You probably can Google it these days, but there's a technique back in one of the books I read that talked about the exact angle to put the cue ball and where you get the most force. But I mean, that's a pretty severe. Being able to alter the angle. So again, all these little things, the more you practice them, the more you get a feel for them, the more you can kind of pull a shot out of your hat a little bit when you're playing. So it's good.
Cue ball and object ball are froze, and you guys shoot them 3/4 the length of the table. Can you stop the cue ball?
Okay, so something like that.
Yep, straight into the pocket and.
Okay, so yeah, so. Let's talk about this for a second, right? So this is a big controversy, especially in a lot of leagues, not so much in tournaments, but in leagues. Now again, yeah, so everybody's league could be a little different. In theory, if the balls are frozen, it's not a foul to shoot through the ball. As long as it's a continuous stroke, right? So technically, yes, if I shoot through this ball, they're both going to scratch. But I can go like this, aim a little low with the cue ball. That is a legal shot in any tournament I would play in and a lot of the leagues because they're exactly frozen. If they're even a 1/16 of an inch apart and there's a little bit of space there, it is not legal to do that because you will have a double hit.
You'll have what?
A double hit. So let's say I'm here. Yeah, so you probably can hear it. You hear the double hit? So a lot of people have tried to come up with ways to avoid arguments on this. Generally what they say is if you're within the width of a cube of chalk, if the cue ball goes forward of the contact point, it's a foul. So in other words, if I'm shooting from like right here, if that cue ball goes forward of the point that it makes contact on the 8, then it's considered a foul because they're figuring there's no way it can go forward without me hitting it twice. So what people try to do is they try to elevate like this, and hit the ball like that. And technically, most people would consider that a legal hit because I made some attempt to elevate my cue and it didn't sound exactly horrible. On high-speed video, it may or may not be a double hit. I've seen Dr. Dave, he's got a great collection of videos. He showed some really pretty good-looking hits, and on high-speed video, the tip touches it like just a fraction. So, but in general, the referee's job is to kind of listen and watch. And in general, like I said, if it goes through the ball, it's usually going to be a foul. So elevating is usually your best bet. Or again, if I had a shot like this, and especially if it's out in the table, where I don't really, can't really elevate, my best bet's going to be to, try to play safe, do something like that. I don't want to even risk, hitting a foul, and these days hurting myself, trying to get way up over here like that and trying to hit it. But I've seen Shane and other people, they'll take a bridge and they'll put another bridge on top of the bridge. So they have like a little thing out in the middle of the table, and they're using their jump cue, and they're like this. I mean, that's... I know most people get really nervous if they're, this is a more typical shot, right? You're sitting something like this. I mean, it's, usually your best bet is to try to elevate. So that was a legal hit, but I barely touched it. Sometimes you'll hit it like that and you'll miss the ball completely, or you'll miscue or whatever. So it's definitely kind of touchy when you get in close quarters like that. Yeah. Well, it's funny because a lot of close jump shots, you watch some of these trick shot guys, they'll shoot a jump shot from an inch away from the ball, or even sometimes like a 1/16 of an inch away. That's an illegal shot. Like if you watch on high-speed video, they're hitting like this. When they hit down, the cue ball jumps and climbs up their shaft. As the shaft vibrates, it actually propels the ball up over the ball. But they've called it legal for years. Nobody really shoots it in a match. It's more of an exhibition shot. But anytime you shoot those close jump shots, usually the shaft it kicks back and it pops the ball over. I mean, it makes logical sense, right? Because if I have a jump shot, and I've seen Larry Neville do this in person, he puts like a credit card between the balls and jumps over it. I mean, it's not even physically logical that I can hit the ball up over this ball and somehow get it to go over here and hit this ball. So I won't even attempt it, but it's like it hits down on it, and it, hits it like that and pops over. It's still pretty impressive, but they haven't changed the rule on that either. So, any other questions before we stop the streaming part at least? Yes, sir.
You were talking about first the aiming system. Can you elaborate a little on eye alignment on the stroke?
Eye alignment. What do you mean by that? Yeah. Yep. So I'll cover that real quick. Yeah. So Noel mentioned like eye alignment on shooting. So dominant eye theory and all of that. There is something to that. I've definitely had a handful of students that did not realize they were opposite eye dominant. They're right-handed. They thought they were right eye dominant. They lined up all their shots with their right eye, and they had inconsistent results. And as soon as I lined them up over their proper vision center, then everything was great. So I find that most people, even if they don't know what eye is dominant, they kind of figure it out through activities in their life, whether it be baseball, golf, whatever. So by the time they come to pool, they usually kind of figure it out. If they can't figure it out, then that's where instruction kind of comes into play and helps out. But you can kind of do a test. There's all kinds of things on the internet you can do. The simplest thing to do is to kind of pick a spot. I'll pick the camera right now since I can look at it, and just make like a triangle with your hands and go like this. Both eyes. Close one eye, close the other. Whichever one when you have one eye open, like for me, I'm left eye dominant. So when I close my right eye, I still see that circle of the camera like right in the middle of my fingers. When I close my left eye, it moves so far that way that I almost can't see it anymore. So I know I'm very strongly left eye dominant. Probably 10% of people are equal eye dominant. So they close both eyes and it stays exactly the same for both. So that means they can be right in their vision center. I hold the cue pretty close to my middle of my chin, but my head is tilted just a hair so that my left eye gets the input before my right eye. It's hard for me to bend over. I had the worst experience playing pool. I would shoot 10, 20 shots in a row perfect, and I'd miss a ball by a foot and thought I made a good stroke, everything was good. So in a lawn match, I missed like 6 balls, and they were, bad. And it turned out that I wasn't getting my left eye over the shot because it was uncomfortable to bend over that way. I was kind of turned this way. And I experience the same thing when I shoot left-handed. I shoot okay, but if I don't get my left eye over the stick the right way, I can make a really good stroke and end up being completely off. So one of the things I like to do with people, and it's pretty simple, just line up 15 balls across the center of the table, you know, put the cue ball 1.5 or 2 feet away, and I'll watch them do that drill just one time. And it's very easy to pick up on any challenges with like the stroke being crooked or the eye not being right. If I see them hitting the ball perfect and it's a stop shot and the ball goes right into the rail, then I know that their aim is, you know, off a little bit. So I think it's important to have consistency. So people that are a little more upright, either because they choose to play that way or they have some health issues, it's more challenging. You can't really see where your tip is on the ball, and you don't really have a frame of reference for where your head is. If you're down on the cue, I can kind of bring my chin down and I can see I'm hitting the same spot all the time if I feel like I'm getting out of whack. And again, that's where having somebody, doesn't have to even be an instructor, just have one of your friends explain to them what you want them to look for, grab your phone, you know, you can watch yourself. If you feel a little bit out of whack, sometimes that little bit of difference can definitely make a difference. Okay. Well, like I said, I'll be here for a couple hours. Thanks to everybody who tuned in on the Facebook stream, and thanks for you guys. Oh, yeah.
I'll play over at,
I didn't know.